interesting mix of readings this morning on this fourth Sunday of Easter, which is also known as Good Shepherd Sunday. So it's really no surprise that there are readings like the 23rd Psalm or the reading from John that evoke that imagery of the Good Shepherd for us for this Sunday that the church always celebrates, the Good Shepherd. Because the date of Easter moves, Good Shepherd Sunday is not always on Mother's Day. It's a wonderful consilience, I guess, today that we are celebrating those together. But interestingly, all of the readings, except the reading from the Acts of the Apostles, are readings that are suggested for the burial office. And then the reading from the Acts of the Apostles is about a death and a resurrection. All of our readings today offer comfort in the face of disease, disorientation, grief, and loss. What's an interesting mix for the Easter season? What is it? I wonder about the resurrection that calls forth a variety of response, both simple joy, a sense of sureness of the rightness of the world, and also an invitation to intentional reflection on what it's like to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And when I preached this sermon at 8 o'clock, a memory arose in me that was too unformed to share as a story at 8, but I just wanted to share it now about how the same experience or the same season, the same Christianity, can bring forth from us different reactions just based on where we are, where we're seated in the world. And the memory was a memory that I had when I was in college and I knew everything. A great time to be. And one thing that I knew was that I was rediscovering my faith in a really wonderful way during my college career down in San Antonio through the reading of the theology written by Latin American writers that was known as liberation theology. And it is so powerful to know that it is in our Christian faith and in partnership with God that we can bring God's love and justice for those who are marginalized in the world. And I was so full of this message of Christianity that I was just receiving that I went home that summer and I had these wonderful conversations with my own mother, and I shared the true essence of Christianity is in how we can partner with God and live justice and mercy and love in the world today. And my mother said, yes, that is good. In the way that maybe a mother can only say to her daughter who knows everything. That is good. And she was the mother who I think began this journey in me because she was such a fierce advocate of civil rights and often read the gospel through that lens of how Jesus wants us to care for the least among us and for those who have been persecuted. So I expected more fervor in her response. But instead she said something like this. When you have lived through the experience of losing to death 2 of your children, you will come to understand that Christianity is a message far deeper than anything we accomplish as living, breathing human beings in this world. Christianity bears a seed in each of us of that promise of life eternal. And so today, I want to focus on that sense of Easter. Not just the joy that we feel with Easter bunnies and Easter eggs and watching children eat too much candy on a particular Sunday morning before they have even come to church. So, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And we are confronted with that valley throughout our lives, aren't we? It arises before us as we near the end of our lives, of course. During a fatal illness or condition, we face the reality that life as we know it is ending in death. But we also find ourselves in the valley of the shadow of death when someone we love dies. Parent, spouse, especially a child. We find ourselves sometimes overwhelmed by grief and certainly unable to pick up and go on as we had before. For we are in the valley. But physical death is not the only thing that can draw us or compel us into the valley. When a married couple is in the midst of separation and the former fabric of their lives and that of their children, that which gave them meaning and joy, has been torn away or torn apart, parents and children alike may find themselves wandering through the valley of the shadow of death. Or a debilitating or chronic illness, even if not in itself life-threatening, can throw us into the valley of the shadow of death because our body has betrayed us, or maybe it's our mind that has betrayed us and we are no longer able to do or to be what or who we once were. A part of what makes us who we are has died, and we find ourselves adrift in a foreign valley. And then there's all those crazy external circumstances that can bring us to the mouth of the valley of the shadow of death. I think about all of those poor people who are experiencing war coming to their land uninvited. Or for some of us, living in peacetime, it can be an economic crisis, or moving from one place to another, or the loss of a beloved ministry, or any major transition that brings about pain and dis-ease and disorientation. All of these can cause that sort of inevitable slide, and we wake up one morning and we find that the valley has come to live right where we are. But not only external things can put us in that place. Sometimes the roots of this movement are more from within. We find the valley all around us as we confront pain or loss from a past that perhaps we have buried for decades and only now are ready to address. We wander in and out of the valley as we move back and forth from those really fun, productive, creative phases of our life to more fallow or contemplative phases. I know those who suffer from diagnosed depression are, for long periods of time, trapped by the walls of that valley. But for whatever reason, that we face the valley of the shadow of death, death itself, or loss, or change, or an internal process, we all know that that place is very painful, unpleasant down to our bones, and if it were up to us, we would never go there. And the force that is American culture is with you on that one, in spades. The American dream, remember, you can have it all, you can have it all, you can have it right now, you can have it all the time. Don't worry, be happy. And if you are not having it all, if you are not dwelling in some constant state of bliss, well then, maybe there's something wrong with you. What, are you lazy? Pull yourself up out of that valley. And if you cannot, you are a failure, a pariah. And it might be catching. So we'll stay a safe distance from you. We'd much rather pretend that worlds such as yours don't really exist. And so we wave goodbye. And you know, after 50 years, a half a century, after Elizabeth Kubler-Ross published her groundbreaking Stages of Grief to try to make the American public more aware of the dynamics of grief and loss, the most that we can do is feebly hold out for 1 year of time to grieve. You get 1 year. You better race through that valley of the shadow of death. 1 year to recover from the loss of your beloved spouse. 1 year to recover from the breakup of your family. 1 year to get over the loss of your dreams for the future, or the loss of a limb. And after that, if you are not back to normal and happy, something must be wrong with you, and whatever it is, we're not sure that we really want to cure it. Our death-denying culture, though, does not save us from the valley of the shadow of death. Our America the Beautiful images simply force us to pretend that it does not exist. And that is a burden we most certainly do not need while we are wandering painfully through loss. So I return to my question from the beginning. Why is it that the Christian church presents aids for the valley of the shadow of death during the season of Easter of all times? It does so because, contrary to prevailing cultural views, our faith accepts that significant portions of our life are spent in a painful valley of disorientation and death. And instead of denying that reality, our faith offers comfort and hope for us when we are walking through it. When you are in that valley of the shadow of death, I think by definition, part of the experience is that you feel so terribly alone, so isolated. Our faith reminds us that despite all evidence to the contrary, you are not alone. Our God, who has walked with countless others on a similar path, is now walking next to you. Our God, who has in flesh walked this path you now trod, is within you, beside you, ahead of you. Even if you can't quite see the way, you are not alone. The Good Shepherd is with you every step you take, comforting you, protecting you, and guiding you. When you're in the valley of the shadow of death, most likely you feel pretty disoriented and sure of only one thing, that this pain will never end. The Christian story is here to remind you that there is indeed new life and you are already in it. When God brings us through the time of terrible persecution, in the words of Revelation, God brings us to new life, a place where we are no longer hungry or thirsty, where the shepherd is feeding us with the water of life and wiping away every tear from our eyes. In the Christian faith, you know, we're not looking like American culture is for things to get back to normal, because they probably never will. We're looking for something much deeper. We're looking with hope for our grief to be transfigured, for our lives to be marked by resurrection, for our hands that hold that pain of a hole pounded through by a nail, to experience new life, even though that hole is never fully gone. But if we remain caught up in pretending that the valley of the shadow shadow of death does not exist, or pretending that we are not in it, or devising some other scheme to avoid it, we will never experience the power of resurrection. For it is only from and through our long, painful wanderings in the valley of the shadow of death that the possibility of new life can fully burst forth into bloom.